Hi, and thank you for tuning in. I'm going to start today's video with a little recap of my last video in which I drew this piece right here. In that video, I was talking about art school and specifically why I left art school after 2 years and didn't go back for a third year. In that video, I had mentioned that the main thing that kind of bothered me about art school 15 years ago, and to be fair, this was the Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver, so I'm not by any means saying that this is what every art school is like every year. It could have been just a bad year, or maybe I just had teachers who didn't share my perspective to the point that I felt kind of like it was a waste of money. Anyhow, what I was saying in that video that bothered me about art school was that there was kind of a trend in the art world that unfortunately I see as continuing even to this day, in that the most highly appreciated and valued and respected art was art that had some kind of disturbing element, like a shock value that makes the viewer uncomfortable. Just to give a couple of examples, one girl made a painting and she used her period blood in it, and the teachers just thought that was brilliant and loved it. Whereas, I just find that kind of disgusting and trite. Like, whatever political point it's trying to make, it's only actually going to just piss off the people who it's trying to make that point towards. But I guess the people who resonate with whatever her message was, this is the funny thing about shock value art. I don't even know what message the people are trying to make with it, because it's just so disgusting and silly to me that the medium overshadows the message. Anyhow, my perspective on art is something I didn't get into in that video, so I'm not going to re-say everything that I already said. Just here's what I made in my last video. If you like it, check it out. What I will say is that the comments beneath that video took a really interesting turn, where some people kind of tried to art-splain to me what my teachers had meant that I took offense to, and that's what I decided to talk about in this video. So before I get into today's drawing and talk, this is what I've been working on since the last video. I kind of challenged myself during this COVID-19 pandemic self-quarantine time to draw every single day. So I'm drawing every day, not an entire full page of drawing every day, but every day I'm drawing at least one new little element of detail on this page. And I think it's turning out pretty cool. So maybe in our next video I'll show you the finished piece once I've kind of activated all the edges and filled in all the gaps. But with that, I'm going to start drawing and telling you guys what I want to say. What's my response to these people? I'd say mansplaining, but I don't really know their gender and I don't want to make this a feminist issue. But the people who were trying to kind of explain to me what my teachers meant by the things I found off-putting. So if you didn't see that video, okay, my lap is getting super shaky because my cat is climbing onto it. And yes, I've got all this paper balanced on my lap. I think we're going to be okay here. I had mentioned that one of the things I took offense to was said by a teacher named Elizabeth McIntosh, and she had already kind of built up a name for herself in the art community as an abstract painter. And, to be totally honest, I love her paintings. I've Googled her and I've seen some of her work, and she does some really cool looking kind of abstract geometric inspired stuff. So just to give credit where credit is due, she's a talented artist. However, and this is a big however, I felt like she was trying to impose her artistic style on everybody else in the class. So she had told me that she's the one who said specifically, in order for a piece of abstract art to be truly art, it should have an element within it that kind of throws the balance off. It shouldn't be harmonious. It should be unharmonious. And there should be something in the color scheme that's disturbing to the viewer. And keep in mind, this wasn't like a political science class. It wasn't a social activism class. It wasn't like this is abstract painting, guys. Abstract painting, where, you know, the entire purpose is to make paintings that are abstract. Yes, if you said that before I finished my sentence. So when it comes to my belief about abstract art, I really fall towards the category of people who believe that the creation of art is a spiritual process. Those of you who are familiar with my channel, you know that in the past I've made videos of guided meditations, and I've spoken about my personal seeking for enlightenment and how that led me, you know, accidentally into a cult in India. But I mean, I had the eagerness to experience something divine enough that, you know, regardless of how crappy it was to wind up in a cult that I'm glad to have gotten out of, I'm still kind of glad that I had that kind of intense seeking that led me into it to begin with. Anyhow, for me, art is the best meditation that I can possibly do. When I'm drawing, when I'm painting, there's a sort of a meditative Zen quality towards the creation. And especially this style of what some people would call doodling. I prefer to just call it drawing, because doodle kind of refers to something that it's like a throwaway thing. Like somebody might doodle on the notes they're taking at a meeting, and at the end of the meeting they throw that in the garbage because it has no inherent value to them. And doodles don't necessarily have to be abstract. You know, some people doodle faces, and some people doodle landscape scenes, and some people doodle superheroes. All doodling really means is that you're kind of drawing without the sake of making a finished piece. You know, you'll kind of leave it sketchy and unfinished and probably just throw it out at the end of that. So why I would consider this a drawing rather than a doodle is that I'm making it for the sake of keeping the finished piece. In fact, I'm drawing on watercolor paper. So my end goal would be to draw a piece that looks pretty nice as a black and white drawing, but then later kind of paint into it with watercolor paints and make it into a finished composition. And sure, there's no pre-planning and there's no compositional element that makes it a planned composition. I just kind of randomly put marks down, but that doesn't make it any less creative or driven as any other kind of art. So anyhow, getting back to my explanation, beneath that last video, some people were saying, okay, when your teacher told you that you're too precious about your art, what she means is that you should be willing to experiment and be willing to wreck it in order to expand your style and to grow from it. Thanks, but that's not actually what she meant to the guy who wrote that, because she didn't say that I'm too precious about my work. She said that my work looks too precious. So I think this is the kind of thing where you'd have to have been there to have really understood the back and forth of that conversation. It's really easy to hear one person say something, and then based on your experience, you kind of fill in what you think happened. But specifically, she told me that my work looked too precious. And I'll give a little context. One of the paintings I made in her class, I painted not only the front of the canvas, but also all the sides, because I like the look of a finished piece where the paint kind of wraps around the whole canvas and it doesn't end where the border of the canvas ends. as an example, I told you guys in the last video I'd show you one of my paintings. I was gonna save this for the end, but here we go, since it's come up. Here's one of my paintings. One of my teachers who I really liked at Emily Carr, he said that the style is maximalist because it's kind of all over the place. But I would always paint the sides of the canvas too, and that way I felt less limited by the format. Anyhow. So she told me that if I paint the sides of my canvases, that's too precious because the painting shouldn't be an object in 3 dimensions. It should be a flat surface because for her, that's what a painting was. So that was the exact setup for her comment that it was too precious. And this wasn't the exact painting she was referring to. It was a different painting done in kind of muted pastel tones. And she said that I should throw in a color that's really opposing to all the other colors in it to make it more, not to make it more anything, but to make it less attractive. And quite frankly, I think that's ridiculously stupid because right now the trend in art might be to create something that disturbs the viewer or that makes the viewer feel uncomfortable. But I'm not creating my art for the sake of fitting into a trend. I'm creating it to express on the outside what I feel on the inside. And I think this is what I didn't get into in my last video because other people had commented beneath it saying that, you know, even if I don't want my art to be political or even if I don't want it to make a specific negative statement or commentary about the world, it's only ornamental if it's not making a statement. And it might as well, I mean, they didn't say this, but I'm saying this, when it comes to ornamental art, it might as well just be a wallpaper design or a greeting card. That's how I hear it when I hear the word ornamental. But I didn't say that I don't want my art to have a message or that I don't have something I'm expressing with it. What I think here, it was my miscommunication. I didn't really specify this well enough. I do have something that I want to express and communicate through my art. And that's a striving in life and in existence for harmony and for beauty and for kind of a divine experience. I had mentioned in that last video my favorite artist of all time is Kandinsky. And Kandinsky wrote a really cool kind of a mission statement about his art called Concerning the Spiritual in Art. And he was really highly influenced by the Theosophy movement. I think more Annie Besant than Madame Blavatsky. But he was very interested in Theosophy. And there was something within the book that she had written that described energetic auras that kind of move around people and that are like a spiritual matter that kind of permeates physical matter and that everything has its own energy. And so when Kandinsky did a painting during the time period where he was inspired by this, he put kind of fuzzy, glowing looking sort of halos around all of the things, all of the objects in his art. And he also made a lot of his objects have some kind of 3-dimensionality to them. They weren't just randomly put on a page. Not like the way my objects are randomly put on a page, but he kind of organized them in a way that had depth to it, which is pretty cool. And what I mean by depth is that there was like a set light source, and so there would be highlights on some parts of his work and shadows on other parts. So even though it was abstract, it looked like it could be a plane. Not an airplane, but an existential plane. Like stuff is existing there, not just random marks on the page. And in the book that he wrote about his artistic inspirations and about what it is that he is trying to communicate and express through his art, he specifically said that he's not trying to make abstract work that looks harmonious. It's not supposed to be harmonious and beautiful. What he's trying to express is the striving, the struggle for spiritual awakening. And he had said something along the lines of any work that tries to be just harmonious or just beautiful for the sake of harmony and beauty, that work is merely ornamental and may as well be a necktie. So he didn't say wallpaper or a greeting card. That's the example I'm giving. He said it might as well just be a necktie. So I mean, Kandinsky, as much as he is my absolute favorite painter of all time, maybe tied with Alex Janvier, he would probably disregard my stuff or be highly critical of it because I do strive for harmony and beauty. But I don't strive for harmony and beauty just for the sake of having marks on a page. I strive for harmony and beauty because my personal spiritual philosophy is that the divine that we're yearning for is harmonious and beautiful. So whereas in his work, he's trying to kind of show that the pain and the difficulty of the quest for something beyond what we know as our painful day-to-day reality. And keep in mind, this was around the time of the First World War and the Second World War. Like, there was a lot of shit going on in his life. That where I'm living in Canada, I know there's still war and there's still strife and there's still struggle in the world, but I have the Canadian privilege where that's not my personal experience. And I think that's affected the viewpoint that I create from. So I'm not trying to portray a struggle or a difficulty or pain in my work. And that's not to say that I haven't struggled in life or that I haven't felt pain or that I haven't felt difficulty. It's to say that besides having felt pain and struggle and difficulty, like I had mentioned earlier, I survived a destructive cult. And most of my videos are about exposing that cult, which is why 90% of my channel is demonetized. Thanks, YouTube, for the censorship. Not. If you couldn't tell, that's sarcasm. But I kind of feel like real life has enough pain and struggle and difficulty just by nature of the fact that as long as we're alive, we will have disagreements with other people. As long as there are boundaries between countries, there will be disagreements between the various flawed human beings who lead those countries. As long as we have to eat to survive, there will be people who are starving. By nature of the fact that we live, we suffer. I don't mean to get into a Buddhist discussion here, but that's one thing that in Buddhism, it's absolutely blatantly true and obviously right, even to people who don't necessarily believe in Buddhism. But I kind of feel like, okay, the quest for spiritual awakening and enlightenment, whatever word you want to call it, it's a quest to get out of the cycle of pain and struggle and difficulty and disharmony. And when you reach a harmonious space, it's just so so awe-inspiring and beautiful. Why would you want to show anything else but that to other people if you're describing, if you're describing yourself through art? When I was a little kid, I had this thing that I would do at night before I fell asleep, where I would kind of lie on my stomach and position my face so that my eyes were pressed into my pillow, but my mouth was still kind of in open air beneath it, so I could still breathe. I wasn't suffocating myself, so if any of you think I was hallucinating due to suffocation, chill. I could breathe just fine. But I would do this thing where I buried my eyes in my pillow so that they were basically in like a blackout void kind of a space. And I would just watch these gorgeous, harmonious, multicolored, geometrically, symmetrically perfect forms appear, similar to what you'd see in a kaleidoscope or in some of Alex Gray's visionary drug-induced art. And I'm saying like this was completely sober. I was a little kid, guys. Of course it was completely sober. No drugs involved in it. But I would watch that kind of light show, like inner laser light display. And that was when I first really wanted to become an artist, because I wanted to be able to draw what I was seeing. It looked so amazing, and it looked like nothing I ever saw in the waking world, in my ordinary conscious state. And I remember my 5th birthday, my grandparents bought me an art easel and a bunch of kids' art supplies, like huge sheets of paper, bigger than any paper I'd ever had before, paintbrushes, paints, a bunch of clay too, and I don't think I ever used the clay because I wasn't as keen on sculpture as I was on drawing and painting. And my Auntie Marilyn, she bought me a set of oil pastels, and my little mind was blown. Oh, I'll never forget the first time I put one of those oil pastels on the paper and started making marks, and they weren't waxy and inconsistent the way crayons were. Like up until then, I'd only ever used like, what was it called? Like Mr. Sniffy or Mr. Sketchy. If you're a Canadian kid, I'm sure you had them too, but those weird nibbed felt pens that had really nice scents to them, like the black one smelled like black licorice, and the dark green smelled like peppermint, and the light green had a sweet fruity smell. I forget what it was. Watermelon. It was watermelon. I remembered it as I was saying that I forget. Anyhow, I'd only ever drawn and colored with either Crayola wax crayons or with those, I think they were Mr. Sketch scented markers. So putting an oil pastel on the paper and discovering the richness of the pigmentation, and that it wasn't hard to color in a big area in a single color, like it went on so smooth. As I'm describing this, I wish I had some nice oil pastels right now to demonstrate and show you guys what I mean. Maybe make 2 drawings, one with wax crayons and one with oil pastels, just to show the difference. But yeah, from that age, when I started making art out of those cool art supplies that my relatives were giving me as gifts, I never felt like I wanted to paint or draw people, because you can take a camera. It's this wild new thing that exists. It's called a camera. I'm not that old. They had cameras when I was a kid too, and they weren't wild new things. I was born in 1984. I'm not that old, guys. But yeah, when it comes to people or places, I always just thought, like, why would I draw something that I could take a photograph of, and the photo will be perfect? Like every detail will be exact identical. It will be an identical photorealistic image of that person. So I always wanted to create with art something that couldn't just be photographed. And what I specifically wanted to show in art were those beautiful things I'd see with my eyes closed, pressed into my pillow as I was falling asleep at night. Now looking back, I'd say that what I was doing as a little kid before sleeping was a type of darkness meditation, similar to putting on a blindfold and meditating, because I wasn't thinking about anything. I wasn't straining to try to see anything. It was just the most relaxing thing I could do. I mean, try it. Try it tonight if you want. Before you sleep, just kind of lay down on your stomach with your eyes against your pillow so that all the light in your bedroom is blocked out. Make sure you can breathe. Don't smother yourself by mistake. And just see if you also see some really cool light effects. I'm curious. I'm going to try it again too, and in my next video get back to you if that still happens, or if it's something that only happened when I was really young. Anyhow, I always wanted to represent that artistically. And I mean, as we got later into the 90s, I noticed that there were some screensavers that kind of looked like that had like trippy light effects that would kind of like woo across the screen. So in order to really represent that, it would probably have to be done digitally with light. But the way that I felt while looking at these kind of meditative visions, it was more calm and more happy, and of course super relaxed, because this is all in bed, as I had said earlier. So there was a certain feeling about it, and I get that same certain feeling when I look at some kinds of abstract art. And also, I also want to mention, like, I don't mean in any way to put lesser value on representational art, because of course, not everything representational could just be photographed. When illustrators create a new little character, those don't exist in nature. They're not just ready to have their photo taken. They're completely new inventions made by an artist who wants to bring them into existence. Totally get that. Or when it comes to surrealism, like Salvador Dali's work, the stuff he painted didn't just exist ready to be photographed. There were no melting clocks out there in a cool desert landscape with an oasis visible that he could have just gone and taken a picture of. I get it. I totally get why some people would want to do representational stuff. And I'm not in any way saying that's not as good as abstract stuff. I'm just kind of trying to explain why I love abstract and why I want to keep making abstract. So the other thing about it is that to everyone who looks at it, it's something different. Just like the way a Rorschach ink blot test, anybody who sees an ink blot will see something different and interpret it as something different. Everyone who sees an abstract drawing or an abstract painting, they'll read into it differently. And one of the other things Kandinsky said was that as an artist, he was creating sort of a visual kind of a symbolic language where each little symbol he made in his art meant something different to him. And I love that. When I first started doing more detailed kinds of drawings, like the one I'm doing right now, they definitely started as doodles because I would draw them in my school books. I would always pick one page in every class subject's book as my drawing page. So a lot of my earliest work, it's on loose leaf binder paper with the blue stripes and the three holes punched on the side because it was in my binder. One of my favorite high school teachers, her name in high school was, I think, Madame Carrier or Mademoiselle. No, not Carrier. I was in French immersion, by the way. Carney. Her name was Jackie Carney. And I think it's different now because she's gotten married since then. But she was my French language arts teacher in high school. And I remember one day thinking, like, she busted me. Like, this sucks. I won't be able to draw in class anymore. Because she looked over and saw that I was drawing in my school book. And to my amazement, she didn't say anything. You know, she looked, she saw I was drawing. I saw that she saw I was drawing. I was ready to hide my drawing because I was afraid she was going to tell me to stop drawing my drawing. But she didn't tell me to stop. And at the end of the class, she called me to her desk and asked if she could see it. And she said it was just so beautiful. And she actually bought that drawing from me. She asked me if I would be willing to sell it and how much I wanted for it. I still remember too because I named a price that I thought was, like, you know, worthy of maybe the 2 or 3 hours I put into it. Back then, guys, minimum wage in Canada was only $7 an hour. So I gave her a price based on that. I was thinking, okay, minimum wage is $7 an hour. This took me about 3 hours, 2.5 or 3 hours. And so I told her $20. Gave a bit of a discount, a little less than minimum wage. And yeah, and she said, cool. She gave me $20 and I gave her that drawing. And I felt so accomplished. Like, that wasn't just a doodle I did in class. That was real art. I was finally a professional. Somebody paid me for a drawing. But anyhow, yeah, I just wanted to kind of go back and clarify, address the comments that were on my last video that if I'm not trying to say anything with the art, then it's just ornamental, it's just decoration, and that I should have taken my teacher's suggestions into account and been willing to put my ego aside and just ruin that nice painting with whatever unharmonious splotch of a color that doesn't go with it that she chose. I mean, I'm not going to try to defend myself. I definitely had the 20-year-old ego back then. Like, I was very egotistical about my art, that it is what I want it to be, and nobody knows better than me, so they can't tell me anything, for sure. Like, I definitely had that. The person who left that comment said that when he was in art school, he could never understand why some of the other students would just keep doing things their way instead of taking the teacher's input into account, because, I mean, they're paying to be in art school, so get your money's worth and, you know, take your teacher's advice, because your teacher's a teacher for a reason. I fully get that point, you know, and he's right. But I still feel just in this one area, I still feel Like, that teacher was hella freaking wrong. She was so wrong. Art does not have to be disturbing to the viewer in order to be valuable. The commentary art is making on life does not have to be an ugly commentary in order for it to have an impact in the world. You know? There was that one artist, what's his frickin' name? He put a urinal, like, upside down, like, he hung a urinal, sideways or on a plinth or something in a gallery, and that was his art. And it was this, like, mind-blowing, amazing thing at his time. He signed it, like, he took a urinal, signed it, put it in a gallery, and that was like this major moment in art history. I think it starts with a D. Shoot, I can picture it, but I forget his name. That goes to show, guys, like, not everyone is the same. Some people would have seen that or heard about that or think about that, and they would never forget his name. It would be like, whoa, he's that artist who had the balls to put a urinal on a wall and call it art. Like, whoa, he's my hero. Some people might. I'm not one of those people. I remember the names of artists whose work I admire and love, not the names of people whose work I think, what the fuck? Pardon my language. Oh, this is going to be demonetized now. Great. But yeah, there are some people who might agree with Elizabeth McIntosh that if there's not a disturbing visual element, then it's not real art. But I think she was seriously wrong. And I also think I was also a bad student for that particular school. My GPA was 4.0 for the entire first year. And I think it's because my teachers in the first year were, maybe not 4.0, maybe like 3.7, 3.8, now that I think back. Because I got mostly A's, but I did get an A- on one English essay. And I think I got A- on the sculpture. I'd have to look at my transcripts. I don't want to lie and give the wrong number, but I had very, very high marks for the first year of art school. They called it foundation year. But in second year, my marks really took a dive. And I think that's because I was getting kind of cynical about the art school process. It might be different if I went back now with a greater appreciation for academia and for what the teachers are trying to share. But in my second year at Emily Carr, I was 21 years old, pretty set in my stylistic ways where I wasn't going to change my work to suit a teacher's opinions. So here's an example of how I was a shit student and how my ego, in retrospect, I kind of effed myself over in the grades department. After Elizabeth McIntosh told me that my work was too precious because I painted the edges of my canvases. Oh, this is embarrassing to even tell you guys, but I'm gonna go ahead and tell you anyway. After she told me my work was too precious, the next painting assignment we did, I literally did this just to piss her off, and it worked. It pissed her off. I think I got like a D on it. I went to the art supply shop and bought one of those like mini canvases that's like 2 inches by like 3 inches. And I painted that little canvas as precious as I could. Like, I think my mom still has it. I think that year when I went home for Christmas, I'm pretty sure I glued a magnet to the back of this little painting and gave it to my mom for Christmas. So if she still has it, I'll show it to you in a future video. my what was I thinking, like, was I trying to fail art school project? But anyhow, I was so mad at her for insulting my work by calling it precious that I decided to just own it and see how far I could push it. So I made a little abstract painting on that teeny tiny little canvas. And not only did I use these tight, controlled, extra stylized little brush strokes, I painted that thing with like a micro detail brush, but also I painted the edges of the canvas gold. I used that cheesy, like metallic shiny gold acrylic paint that they sell, that I would always look at it and wonder who would buy that, because you couldn't really mix it with any color, or it goes on so flat that you couldn't use it in any kind of a painting other than maybe like a religious icon where it's supposed to look flat and gilded. But anyhow, I bought some of that stuff so I could not only paint the edge of the canvas, but paint it gold, like a little precious thing. And I was so proud of myself for, like, you know what, bitch, you're gonna call my work precious? You're gonna insult me? You're gonna tell me that I have to make it disturbing to the viewer? I'm gonna make this thing so pretty and so precious, and you're gonna have to look at it and take it seriously and critique it just like everybody else is, like it was my way of sticking it to the man, so to speak. Not a smart idea, because the man was the one who decided my grade. So my very high 3-point-something GPA went down to like 3.5 in second year because of my precious rebellion, is what I'll call it now. I had a very precious rebellion in my second year of art school. But I don't want to dwell on the negative anymore. I want to tell you guys about some of the things that were positives about art school. As I share with you that my philosophy of art should be to make it harmonious and make it beautiful and express what I think is great about existence. Why am I continuously talking about all the bad things about art school? I'm going to tell you about some of the good things in art school. One of the best was Art Perry's art history class. I think I told you about him in one of my previous videos where I'm drawing and talking. He compiled a book of photography of photos of the Tibetans. And I just loved his class because he has a really good way of telling stories. And in one of those classes, he was telling us about one of his first jobs. He used to be, I think he was a reporter for the Vancouver Sun. He was a reporter for either a magazine or the Vancouver Sun, like some newspaper, some print publication. I don't want to misquote, but it was definitely a print publication that he used to work for. And his job, if you can call it a job, because I just think it would be super duper fun, was that he would interview artists. And so whatever was going on in the art scene in Vancouver, he would cover that for this print publication. And one of the interviews he did was with Andy Warhol. And it was so cool hearing him describe his interview with Andy Warhol, because when the formal part of their interview was over, he kind of chatted with him a little bit, like they got along well enough that their conversation continued. And he asked Andy Warhol, you know, what was he planning to do in Vancouver while he was there for that exhibit? Like, did he have anything going on? And for those of you who don't know, like, Andy Warhol is famous, super famous, for the pop art movement. He basically invented pop art. He's the one who did all those paintings of Marilyn Monroe, in all different colors and using a dot matrix similar to a comic book. He painted the Campbell soup can. We've all seen that kind of, it's become a meme. Like he is, anybody who knows art knows at least one of Andy Warhol's pieces, either the Marilyn Monroe or the Campbell soup can. And of course his public image was party boy, like drunken, using drugs, Studio 54, like disco era party scene. So anyhow, as I was sitting there in my art history class listening to Art Perry describe interviewing Andy Warhol, I was expecting the story to turn into, like, he and Andy Warhol went partying at some club in Vancouver. You know, that kind of thing. But it took a totally different turn. He said that Andy Warhol said to him off the record what he was most looking forward to was visiting the Museum of Anthropology on the University of British Columbia campus, because he was absolutely, like, fascinated with the coastal First Nations people of British Columbia. He named a bunch of his favorite artists who were known for carving totem poles and doing the really stylistic Coast Salish kind of art that's like black, red, and white choppy prints. And he knew a lot about it. And Art Perry described it like as if Andy Warhol was kind of like a fanboy, kind of fanboying. He didn't use those words. That's my word for it. But about the Coast Salish art. And what was so fascinating to me, what I'll never forget about that, was that Andy Warhol specifically told Art Perry, don't tell anybody about this. Do not put this in your article. I don't want anybody to know about the depth of my fascination for Coast Salish artwork. And it was because his public persona was so shallow and so consumeristic. The pop art and the glitz of Studio 54, like the golden lame dresses made by Halston, like the whole world that he was living in with disco and that kind of shit, I would call it. It was so at odds with the kind of spiritual intrigue that he had with his personal depth, considering the fascination he had for the Coast Salish work, that he didn't want to spoil his public image. And he specifically said this to Art Perry, like it would ruin his image if people knew that he felt such a strong way about First Nations art. And of course, Art Perry mentioned in this discourse, he was only telling art students about that now, like years and years after Andy Warhol's death. So there's no need to maintain his public persona anymore. But I just found that kind of interesting, like what I thought that I knew about Andy Warhol was not the real Andy Warhol. It was a character he created for people to consume, for people of his time to consume. Somebody else had commented, I'm so sorry guys that I don't know the names of the people who made these comments because I don't have my laptop open to read them as I'm filming. But I mean, you can go look at my last video and scroll through the comment section to find these various comments from people. But somebody had commented saying that I had said something in my video against, for example, Lady Gaga's dead animal flesh suit that I think is, I mean, fur coats and leather are disgusting, like killing an animal for your fashion. How greedy are people, where we can literally recycle plastics into an insulation for our coats equal to down, where we don't ever get cold. I've got a winter coat made by Vote Couture, and I can go outside in minus 30 degrees Celsius weather. That's what, like minus 70 Fahrenheit? I don't know the conversion. Or like minus 10 Fahrenheit. I'm not good with these things. But how greedy and selfish are people that they would buy a down coat where a bunch of poor birds need to get killed, and then their down has to get plucked, and they don't even keep people as warm as some of the vegan materials that are literally made out of recycled stuff. Anyhow, I don't want to get into another vegan rant because there's a time and a place. I should make another video just about that. But anyhow, I was saying the kind of art that I hate the absolute most is art like, and I use I'm doing air quotes off camera so you can't see this, but the art like Lady Gaga's meat suit, where she made freaking clothing out of steaks or some other, I don't know whether it was a dead cow or dead pigs or what kind of poor animal she killed, but and I say she killed because if she paid for it, she hired an assassin to kill it. I mean, no, I'm not into the polite accepted words like slaughterhouse. No, that is a murder house, and if you eat meat, I'm sorry guys, I'm going to be blunt about it, but if you eat meat, you kill animals. You personally pay money, or your parents pay money if you still live at home and you eat what you're served. Money is paid to hire a hit on those animals, and they are killed for you to enjoy their taste. Even though there's no actual nutrition need for that, you could be even healthier on a plant-based diet. There's my rant for the day. I'm done. Damn it, I wasn't going to get into this. Anyhow, when Lady Gaga wore that meat suit, or some taxidermy kind of artist, puts on exhibitions. I'm mad. My vegan anger is coming out. But yeah, when people use murdered animals' body parts in their work and they call it art. So somebody had commented, here's where I'm going with that. Somebody commented that when people have really deep emotions, and I'm paraphrasing here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but somebody tried explaining it to me, mansplaining it to me from the perspective that, if somebody has really deep emotions, they'll make a statement using something like the meat suit, like Lady Gaga specifically. She'll make up a meat suit, and she'll think that it's expressing this thing that she wants to express, but really, it just seems super lame and shallow and silly to everybody else because she fails to actually express what she wants to express. I'm sorry, it wasn't rudely mansplained. I just think it's funny to say mansplain when a man explains something. Please don't be offended. I wasn't offended by this person's comment. I put a love on this comment because I thought it was fascinating, the discussion he got into. And I'll try to reply to that comment soon. It was long. The only reason I didn't reply to his comment was that it was like multiple paragraphs long. And I felt like I would have to reply back to that comment with multiple paragraphs. To do justice to the time he took out of his life to write as much as he did, which I really appreciate. Like, thank you for that comment. It was interesting. And I totally agree with what he said, that a lot of these artists who do these shock value kind of works of art, what they think is being expressed might not be what the viewer gets out of it. And so they've got this grand idea and this way of depicting it with a meat suit, or with, a shark in a tank of cyanide, or with, that girl who made a painting using period blood. And they might be thinking like, yeah, I'm communicating my point to my viewer, and people, oh, it's so deep. It's so deep. I'm so deep. Look what I'm doing. I'm such a deep, creative individual. And then viewers see it and just, no. Like, that's not deep. That's extremely stupid. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to shit on people's self-expression. I'm sure there are other individuals out there who would see things like that and feel that they are great, or maybe they remember the point the artist is trying to make. I still don't think animals should ever be killed to make those kinds of silly points. Use a prosthetic. Not a prosthetic, sorry, that's the wrong word for it, but use a okay, here's another form of silly, ridiculous art that I think is dumb, but at least it's better than actual dead animals. It's that kind of art that people make using dolls or doll parts. Before I moved to Vancouver to go to the Emily Carr University of Art and Design, I had a studio in Lethbridge, and it was called the Potemkin Studios, and it was like an artist. I didn't call it that. But it was like this little village of artists, a little community of artists in an old building in downtown Lethbridge that was basically a condemned building. Like, it could never be converted into apartments because it wasn't zoned for living. It was probably insulated with asbestos. Thinking back, like, it was haunted too. Shit, guys, like, if any of you have watched almost an hour of me drawing and babbling, and are hearing this question, please answer it, because I think you're in a very small minority. I might not even get an answer to this question, but how many of you are into ghost stories? Because the ghost stories I could tell from that art studio, it was insane. Anyhow, I had the studio. A studio in a collective of studios that was called the Potemkin. And it was such a cool community of people. The guy who rented the studio right next to mine, his name was Roger, and he was a professional skateboarder. So he wasn't in Lethbridge for half the year. He was out making like professional skate videos for Vans. And he also owned a shop in downtown Lethbridge called Borderline. It was like the skateboard shop. In our town, in our city. And down the hall, there was this guy named Russ, who is a really talented DJ and also a really talented graffiti artist. I don't think he ever did like graffiti outside on buildings. I don't think he tagged. I don't think he did anything like public. But he had these gigantic canvases, and all the walls in his studio were covered in his graffiti. I think I still have a drawing he gave me once. I'll show you in a future video. I'll put it up on my wall. I've got to go through all the stuff I had stored at my mom's house before I moved to India. Anyhow, the Potemkin. There were lots of very talented artists in that collective of artists. Most of them were students at the University of Lethbridge in the art program. Anyhow, I forget what I was even going to say about that studio. I know, oh, yeah, the other kind of art that I think is like the stupidest freaking art in existence. Like, it shouldn't be called art. It should be called creepy grown-ups making creepy stuff out of kids' toys. I think by that description you'll already know what kind of art I'm referring to. But there was a girl who used to come to our parties at that studio, like every Friday night until Monday morning. There would be like a 48-hour continuous party where like somebody was constantly DJing. Like, it wasn't Russ he wasn't like a Superman who would stand at the turntables for 48 hours, but like he would take a turn and then sit down and drink for a while, and then somebody else would go take over the turntables. Anyhow, there was a girl who used to come to these parties. She didn't rent a studio in the building, but she knew a bunch of the other artists. And the work she would do was like, she would get old mannequins from stores that closed down and like dolls from the thrift shop and just tear the limbs off of them and tear the heads off of them and make these like weird 3D collage sculptures out of doll parts. And I mean, it would look creepy and sinister. I think that's ridiculous too. I don't know what point it's trying to make. Really creepy. Like, I could see how that could be used for a political point. For example, if somebody did some research and found out how many innocent Jewish victims were buried in mass graves outside of a concentration camp, and then they bought that many dolls and put them in a big giant hole, like to depict visually the loss of life in a way that people could tangibly understand. That would be using dolls to make a point that I think would stick with people, you know? But just dismembering a bunch of dolls and sticking them together, why? What's it saying? What is the viewer supposed to get from it? I think it's dumb. But at least it's not killing animals to do it. So anyhow, if you want to make stupid, ugly art and think that you're deep, at least do it with plastic or with something inanimate. Don't make an animal die for it. Anyhow, end rant, end picture. I know I got off topic, as I always do, but and I have to end this video now, even though I think I'm going to keep adding to this drawing just because the sun is nearly set. So as you can see, the light has blued a lot. It's gotten much darker. But yeah, the main point I wanted to make was that I feel like I didn't communicate properly in the last video, that I don't consider my work to be just meaningless doodled ornamentation. I consider it to be striving for harmony. When there's an awkward thing in it visually, like here, I'm going to look at this. For example, here, where it kind of goes off in a direction that doesn't flow with the rest of the piece. That's the kind of thing that I'll look back on kind of critically and think, you know what, I would do that differently next time. Like, I do strive in each drawing to make them look visually harmonious and soothing to a viewer. And I try to include enough differentiation between the lines and shapes. Like, I want some straight lines, I want some circular shapes, I want some curved lines, because I've discovered through trial and error with drawing that the more visual differences, the more different kinds of elements they are, the more likely it is that when you look back at it, you'll be able to see different kinds of things in it. For example, I'm looking now, already I see like a snake coming up to this kind of curly-cued symbol here. I mean, this is not what I was going for, but somebody who looks at this visually might see that curly-cue thingy as an apple. And then, wait a minute, if that's an apple and that's a snake, maybe there's a Garden of Eden reference. I don't believe in the Abrahamic religions, so that's totally not what I'm going for. I'm just trying to explain. I like putting things in the drawings that could be seen as other things. This little piece right here could be seen like a bumblebee. This here could be like a feathered headdress for some kind of awesome tribal leader, you know? This could be a wave about to crash down. I like putting in elements that could be differently interpreted. I think that for the kind of ornamental art that somebody would, you know, not me, but some people might see it as a lesser form of art, like the repeat patterns for wallpaper or like the illustrations for a greeting card. To me, those would have highly repetitious elements where I've seen these kinds of things, either floral motifs or repeated motifs where, say, the entire page is done in swirls, or the entire page is done in circles, or it's all straight lines like a crosshatch or a weaving pattern, or it's weaving with some floral elements. The reason I would consider my work to be different than just ornamental work is that I deliberately draw it in such a way that there's a wide variety of different kinds of visual elements. You probably noticed if you were watching and not listening to it like a podcast, which I'm sure I would do if I was my own subscriber, if it was somebody else making this video, like Peter Draws. I love his channel. It's his channel that inspired me to do videos like this, so shout out to Peter Draws. He has a similar kind of aesthetic in a lot of his abstract drawings to what I have. Different, but I can see similarities. When I put on one of his videos, some of them are like 3 hours long. So I'll turn them on and I'll see him start the drawing, and then I'll go to my desk where I make jewelry, because my day job is an Etsy shop where I make gemstone jewelry. So I'll have one of his videos playing as I do my beadwork. And then from time to time, I'll come over and look at the computer screen to see where his drawing has grown and evolved. I don't literally watch him draw for the whole 3 hours. So what I'm getting at here is if you didn't watch me draw this for the last hour and 6 minutes, I take no offense to that. I don't think I would either. I would probably put the video on like 2 times the speed mode and just glance at it now and then if I was going to watch it the whole way through. Anyhow, now I'm just babbling and it's about time to end the video. But I think I've done my job in communicating what I wanted to communicate this time, and that I feel like the world has enough darkness and negativity and confusion and disturbance already. Anybody who turns on the news will see that people are dying from natural disasters and from the pandemic right now and other pandemics in the past. Art, to me, is a safe place to retreat into when I don't want to be reminded of all the crap going on in the world. And so while I recognize the need for and the validity of art that does go into those topics for the sake of maybe better understanding them or communicating the artist's opinion or feeling about them to a viewer, while I totally get that, and I don't say that's not art, I also say that there's an equally valid need to put things into the world that are beautiful and harmonious and that communicate a sublime sentimentality towards existence as a whole. You know, that beyond all the suffering and all the struggle and all the difficulty, there's also kindness and joy and love and light, and that it is no less deep and no less profound to strive to realize that and to have some glimpses of experience of that, and then to make an effort to visually represent that. And that's my goal. The absolute best thing that ever happened to me as an artist, the greatest feedback I've ever had, was a huge abstract drawing. I did a drawing like this on a piece of paper that was like 30 inches by 20 inches. And I made that into a lithograph print. I mentioned this in my last video. And even though my lithography teacher thought it was shit, the other students in my class all loved it. So when our class had the gallery space at the Emily Carr School, when we got the main gallery space for our class to have an exhibit, each class there, like a painting 201 class, would get to put on a show, you know, for a week, and the sculpture class would put stuff on plinths for a show for a week. So when it was our lithography class's turn to put on a show, the students got to vote in which pieces made by other students would go into the show. And when it came to my piece, It wasn't even my idea. I forget which of my classmates came up with this, but one of the other students said that she wanted to see an entire wall covered in my lithograph print, because I had made like 25 of these things. And so I was so grateful and so touched. Like it meant so much to me that the whole class voted for it because, I mean, space was limited, so we each got to put in one piece of our work. The fact that they all decided that my drawing deserved to be shown on a huge scale, where I got my own wall and covered it in, basically repetitions of the same exact drawing, it meant a lot to me. I was truly touched. To this day, I'm grateful to my classmates in that class that, even though I got a D because the teacher hated my work, hate's a strong term. I think if he hated it, I would have gotten an F, but he strongly disliked my work. But yeah, even though the teacher wasn't into it, I think it was worth it in retrospect that I took that class because the other students liked it. And it felt pretty good on the opening night. I felt quite proud of seeing my art in a professional gallery space, taking up a whole wall. And as I was saying at the beginning of this video, my goal is to take the stuff I see in meditations and represent that visually. And around that time, I was also starting to read more of the abstract expressionist movement, and specifically, and here's where I think the synchronicity comes in. Art is full of synchronicities. I mean, the timer on my phone when I started this was 1:11:11, like 1 minute, 11 seconds. No, sorry, 1 hour, 11 minutes, 11 seconds. Anyhow, synchronicity was that in one of my art history classes, I think it was Art Perry's art history class, the same one where he spoke about natural earthworks, and he had that interesting interview with Andy Warhol. He covered one entire class about Mark Rothko. And for those of you who don't know, Mark Rothko basically invented the artistic style of a color field painting. He would take huge, like 8-foot canvases, 10-foot canvases, and paint the entire canvas in either one color or two colors where they kind of scratchily blend together where they touch, but not deliberately blended. Mark Rothko actually created a place in the United States that I would love to visit one day. That's like the Mark Rothko, I don't remember whether they call it a church or a temple or a chapel, but it's basically one small room filled with canvases that he's done, gigantic canvases that are done in black with kind of a purplish undertone. And his goal for these gigantic black color field paintings is that when people look at them and are engulfed by them, like I think the room is octagonally shaped, so it has like 8 walls, each one covered in a color field painting. When somebody is surrounded by that, Mark Rothko's goal was that they would experience kind of an out-of-body state, that it would lead them towards this ecstasy. Anyhow, in art history class, the teacher was telling us all about the state of consciousness that abstract expressionists would strive to evoke in their viewers. And I teared up during that class when he described this, because it was like suddenly I didn't feel so, I don't mean this to sound melodramatic, like suddenly I didn't feel so alone in the world, but it's true. Suddenly I felt like, okay, there was an epic in art history. There was a time when the same thing I consider my artistic goal was the artistic goal of others. Like I felt such a strong connection to that. And to the automatistes from Montreal, who I've mentioned in previous videos, like the Canadian group who did this, and to Kandinsky, and to all the great abstract painters. So I was making these lithograph prints of my highly detailed big abstract drawing, inspired by a color field painting. And you can't get more opposite than a color field painting, which is detailless. It's just a big giant field of color, hence the name color field, compared to something like this where it's tons of little teeny tiny details, or like this one that I'm working on, where it's the opposite of a color field. It's lots of little elements. But even though the style might be opposite, the goal was the same. So the proudest moment I had in art school was, it was the last exhibit before Christmas holidays, the semester break. And my mom came to visit. She came out to Vancouver to see me, and she saw that exhibit, and the two of us traveled back to Lethbridge together for the holiday, which was so sweet. But I got to show my mom my work up in a gallery. I felt so proud. But what was really cool was at the end of the break, when I came back to Vancouver and we took down that exhibit, I carried one of the prints and gave it as a gift to a lady named Christine, who was the manager of a shop on Granville Island, very close to my school, a shop called the Crystal Arc. And that was the place I would go, like, when I had a break between classes or at the end of a school day on days when I finished early. I would go in there and just soak up the energy of the crystals. And for those of you who think it's just New Age hokum and that there is no energy to crystals, guys, I challenge you, go to a crystal shop, not during the time of COVID-19, but when this pandemic is relatively over, when it's safe to venture out into the community again. Go to a crystal shop just as an experiment. You don't even have to buy anything. Just go in there and feel it. Because you might not feel anything, but you might feel something. Personally, I would always feel something. Like I would get energized if it was the end of the day and I was tired, and I'd go into that shop. Anyhow, some days I would go there and I would just chat with this lady, Christine, for hours, you know. In fact, the first time I ever went to the Crystal Arc, she and I chatted for so long that when she closed up the shop and I was still frickin' there, she invited me to go for dinner with her, and we went to a restaurant called The Foundation, which I am so sad that they closed because Vancouver rent has spiked so high. It was a restaurant that every vegan has to go to in Vancouver at least once. It was so cool. Anyhow, I'm doing that babbly thing again. Back to the point. I brought Christine one of those prints as a gift, and she looked at it for the longest time and said, "I think a friend of mine tried to tell me about this." And I asked her what she meant, because, I mean, how would a friend of hers have known to tell her about that? So I asked her what she meant, and she said, "Was this up on display at Emily Carr, taking up an entire wall where you had lots of them?" And I said, yes. And I'm thinking like, ooh, she's a psychic. But no, it wasn't psychic. She said that a friend of hers had just randomly decided to go see the exhibit at Emily Carr. And she said that when he got to a wall covered in these intricately detailed little abstract drawings, he got really, really close to one of the prints and was just losing himself in the illustrations, the abstract details, that he started to get closer and closer and closer to see the little details, and then he started to kind of step back to see the whole of all of them on the wall. And she said that he told her she had to get there and see that exhibit because it threw him into an out-of-body experience. And as she described that to me, I teared up, because that meant like the absolute highest goal I had set for myself with my art, which is to convey a mystical or a transcendental kind of an experience through a drawing, it had successfully happened. And she said that she tried, like she went to the school, but the exhibit had already been taken down, so she didn't get to see what this friend of hers had told her about. And then later that day, I brought her one of the prints from that very exhibit. So anyhow, like I said, synchronicities. And for me, the sign in life that we're doing the right thing are when synchronicities happen. And I really feel art is a spiritual experience if we let it be, if that's what we go into it to make it. And I'm going to keep making more videos like this. Originally, this was going to be like my quarantine project where I make some art videos, but I really feel like this is what I want my channel to be. This means more to me than my face on camera blabbering stuff. So yeah, let me know in the comments below any topic you would like me to blabber about as I doodle. Blabbering and doodling. They're literally the worst words I could use to describe drawing and talking. Blabbing and doodling. No, let me know if there's any topic you'd like me to discuss while I draw, because I'd rather think of this as a discussion and a drawing. Yeah, and I might just take that up as a topic for a future video. Leave any comments, ask any questions. I would love to get more topics that I can discuss here, and I'll keep making more art as we talk about it. I've got some old copies of my coloring books here that I was going to talk about. Pardon my old name, it was when I was still in the cult that I made these. But yeah, I've had some people comment that I should make coloring books, so I was going to show you that, hey, guess what? I already have. They're no longer available because I don't want anything out there with my old name on it, but maybe I'll do some videos in the future. Whoops, this picture here, it's the same, it's the line work for my cover that I colored in myself. Anyhow, this video is way too long already, so maybe I'll show you these books in my next video, like a show and tell. I've got 5 copies of this coloring book available, and I could definitely sell them, maybe in my Etsy shop. If you want one, leave me a comment. Shipping might be expensive. What I'll do is if anybody wants to buy them, I'll sign them. I'll write you a little message on this front page here, sign it. I'd have to find out how much it costs to ship them. They'd be about, I think I originally priced them at $11.11, but the shipping would be super expensive. And I'd sign them and do a little drawing, so I'll think of prices, because now they're also limited edition. You can't get these babies anymore from Amazon. Anyhow, let me know if you'd be interested in that. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope that explains a little more where I'm coming from. Not that I think art should be just pretty and not communicating any message, but that I believe art should be harmonious and communicate a message about divinity and beauty and strive to be more than the struggle we see in the world when we watch the news. Yeah, so thank you for watching. I look forward to your comments. I look forward to future video topic suggestions. And I'm going to end this before I blabber anymore. And I'm going to go look at that sunset outside, because by the lighting in here, I think it's going to be pretty. So much love. Stay safe. I wish all the best for you and your family during this pandemic. Thank you for taking the time to join me in this video. And I look forward to the next time. Bye.